Rain hammered against the windows of Lincoln Elementary School in Newark, New Jersey, creating a hypnotic rhythm that echoed through the empty hallways. Sarah Mitchell, 34, was organizing the last of her third-grade students' work while watching droplets streak down the fogged glass. The wall clock read 5:45 p.m., and the school was practically deserted, except for the cleaning staff working silently on the upper floors. Sarah was known for her dedication. Even after 8 years of teaching, she still arrived early and left late, always seeking ways to improve her lessons and help her students. Her brown hair was pulled back in a disheveled bun, the result of a long workday, and her green eyes reflected the typical fatigue of a rainy Friday in October. "Another week," she murmured to herself, storing the last notebooks in the brown leather bag her mother had given her years ago. The sound of rain intensified and she sighed, knowing she'd have to run to the parking lot. As she turned off the classroom lights and locked the door, Sarah heard a strange sound coming from the school courtyard. It was a muffled cry, almost imperceptible amid the storm's noise. She stopped, listening carefully. For a moment she thought it was just the wind, but the sound repeated, definitely a child crying. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped her bag on the floor and ran towards the door leading to the courtyard. The rain hit her immediately, soaking her navy blue blouse and knee-length skirt. The October cold cut through her skin, but she ignored the discomfort, focused only on finding the source of the crying. In the darkest corner of the courtyard, near the rusty swings, she saw a small, huddled figure. It was a boy, appearing to be about 7 years old, wearing a completely soaked white t-shirt and jeans torn at the knee. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and he was trembling violently, both from cold and fear. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten him further. "What are you doing here alone?" The boy lifted his face, revealing enormous, frightened brown eyes. There was a small cut on his forehead, and his cheeks were red from crying so much. He looked at her with distrust, like a wounded animal that didn't know if it could trust. I got lost," he said in a trembling voice, clearly Italian accent mixed with American English. "I can't find my daddy." Sarah felt her heart tighten. Without thinking twice, she took off her coat and wrapped the boy, who offered no resistance. "It's okay now. What's your name?" "Marco," he replied, allowing her to help him stand. "Marco Rossi." "Hello, Marco. I'm Miss Mitchell, but you can call me Sarah. Let's get out of this rain, okay?" Marco nodded and Sarah guided him back inside the school. Their footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as she led him to her classroom. Once inside, she turned on the heater and grabbed some towels she kept in her closet for emergencies like this. "Let's dry you off," she said, wrapping Marco in a soft towel. "Are you hurt? How did you get that cut on your forehead?" Marco touched the wound gently. "I fell when I was running. There were men shouting, and my daddy told me to run and hide." Sarah frowned, worried. The story didn't make much sense, but she could see the boy was genuinely scared. "Men shouting? Do you remember where this happened?" "Near the big buildings," Marco said vaguely, gesturing with his small hands. There were black cars and very loud noise, like fireworks, but it wasn't a party. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Fireworks that weren't a party. In Newark, that could only mean one thing. But she pushed those dark thoughts away, focusing on the boy in front of her. "Do you know your daddy's phone number?" she asked, taking out her cell phone. Marco shook his head. "He always said I didn't need to know because he would always be with me." Sarah sighed softly. "And your mommy?" Marco's eyes filled with tears again. "Mommy went to heaven last year. Now it's just me and Daddy." Sarah's heart broke. She knelt in front of Marco, looking directly into his eyes. "Listen, Marco, we're going to find your daddy, okay? But first, you need to eat something and warm up. You must be hungry." As if on cue, Marco's stomach rumbled loudly, making him blush with embarrassment. Sarah smiled gently. "Let me see what I have here." She rummaged through her desk and found a granola bar and a water bottle she had saved for her afternoon snack. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for now. While Marco ate voraciously, Sarah observed his movements. There was something in the boy's posture, in the way he constantly looked around, as if expecting danger at any moment. "Marco," she said carefully, "can you tell me more about what happened today? Anything you remember might help us find your daddy." Marco chewed thoughtfully before responding. "We were at Daddy's office. He had an important meeting with other men. I was playing with my toy cars in the corner when the noise started." "What kind of noise?" "Shouting, and then those sounds like fireworks. Daddy grabbed me and told me to run to the safe place he showed me, but I got confused and ran the wrong way." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Marco's description sounded dangerously like a shooting. "Do you remember the name of your daddy's office? Or the street where it is?" "It's near the river," Marco said, "and it has a big sign with a fish." Sarah knew Newark well enough to know there were several establishments near the Passaic River, many of which were known for questionable activities. But she couldn't make assumptions. Her priority was keeping Marco safe and finding his family. "Okay, sweetheart, I'm going to call the police so they can help find your daddy." Marco's eyes widened with fear. "No! Daddy said never to talk to the police. He said they're not our friends." Sarah paused, her hand already on the phone. Marco's reaction was too intense to be just childish fear. There was something deeper there, something that made her teacher's instincts sound alarms. "Marco," she said gently, "why did your daddy say that about the police?" The boy looked down, nervously playing with the edge of the towel. "He said our family is different, that people don't understand our work." Before Sarah could ask more, the sound of tires screeching on wet asphalt echoed from the parking lot. Marco jumped from his chair, running to the window. "It's them!" he shouted, pointing to 3 black SUVs that had just stopped in front of the school. "They found me." Sarah looked out the window and saw men in suits getting out of the vehicles. Even at a distance and in the rain, she could see they moved with military purpose, checking the surroundings before heading to the school entrance. "Marco, who are these people?" she asked. But the boy was already hiding behind her desk, trembling violently. "They're going to hurt me," he whispered. "Daddy said if something happened to him, bad men would come after me." Sarah's heart raced. She looked out the window again and saw the men were now at the school entrance, testing the doors. In a few minutes, they would find a way in. Without thinking twice, Sarah picked up Marco. "We're getting out of here," she said, heading for the back door of her classroom that led to the service corridor. "Where are we going?" Marco asked, clinging to her neck. "To a safe place," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure where that would be. All she knew was that Marco's genuine fear had convinced her that these men represented a real threat. They ran through the dark corridors, Sarah using her memory to navigate the building she knew like the back of her hand. Behind them, she could hear the sound of doors being forced and male voices echoing through the hallways. "This way," she whispered, leading Marco to the emergency exit that opened to the staff parking lot. Her mind worked quickly, trying to formulate a plan. When they reached her car, a blue 2018 Honda Civic, Sarah put Marco in the back seat and said, "Duck down and don't lift your head until I say so, okay?" Marco obeyed immediately, and Sarah started the car with trembling hands. As she left the parking lot, she saw in the rearview mirrors that the men had found the back exit and were running toward their vehicles. "Are they following us?" Marco asked, his voice muffled by his position. Sarah looked in the rearview mirror and saw the black SUVs leaving the school parking lot. "Yes," she said, pressing the accelerator. "But don't worry, we're going to be fine." As she drove through Newark's wet streets, Sarah tried to process what was happening. In less than an hour, her life had completely changed. She had found a lost child in the rain and was now fleeing from unknown men who clearly had dangerous intentions. "Marco," she said, keeping her eyes on the road, "I need you to tell me the truth about your daddy. What kind of work does he do?" There was a long pause before Marco answered. "He takes care of family business. He said our family is very important and that many people depend on us." Sarah felt a chill. The puzzle pieces were beginning to form, and the image emerging was more dangerous than she had imagined. But looking in the rearview mirror at the scared boy in the back seat, she knew there was no turning back. Marco needed her, and she wouldn't abandon him. The rain continued falling, washing Newark's streets as Sarah drove into the unknown, carrying with her a secret that would change their lives forever. Behind them, the black SUVs continued the chase, their occupants determined to recover what they had lost. The first chapter of Sarah and Marco's journey had begun, and there was no way to predict where this road would lead them. Sarah drove through Newark's dark streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly while constantly checking the rearview mirror. The black SUVs were still there, maintaining a calculated distance, like predators waiting for the right moment to attack. The rain had diminished to a persistent drizzle, but the streets still gleamed under the streetlights, creating reflections that made visibility difficult. "Marco, are you still okay down there?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the panic she felt growing in her chest. "Yes, Miss Sarah," came the muffled response from the back seat. "Are they still following us?" Sarah looked in the rearview mirror again. The SUV's headlights cut through the darkness like predatory eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, but we're going to lose them." She knew Newark reasonably well, having lived in the city for 5 years since moving from a small town in rural Pennsylvania to pursue her teaching career. She made a quick decision and turned right onto Broad Street, heading toward downtown where traffic would be denser, even on a Friday night. "Marco," she said, maintaining a gentle tone, "I need you to help me understand some things. You said your daddy takes care of family business. What kind of business?" There was a long pause. Sarah could hear Marco moving in the back seat, probably struggling between loyalty to his father and the trust he was developing for her. "Daddy has restaurants," Marco finally said, "and he helps people who need protection." Sarah felt her stomach sink. Protection. In Newark, especially coming from an Italian family, that could only mean one thing, but she needed to be sure. "Protection from what, Marco?" "From bad people who want to hurt their businesses," he replied, with the innocence of a child who didn't fully understand the adult world. "Daddy always says our family protects good people." Sarah turned left onto Market Street, passing closed shops and restaurants with dim lights. The SUVs still followed her, but she noticed they kept their distance, as if they didn't want to draw attention in a busier area. "Marco, what's your daddy's full name?" "Vincent Anthony Rossi," Marco replied without hesitation. "But everyone calls him Vinny." The name echoed in Sarah's mind like an alarm bell. Even being new to Newark, she had heard whispers about the Rossi family. They were known for controlling a significant part of the city's alternative businesses, from illegal gambling to protection for commercial establishments. Vincent Rossi was rumored to be one of the most powerful and dangerous men in New Jersey, and now she was driving through the city with his son in the back seat. "My God," she murmured, more to herself than to Marco. "Miss Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of the situation. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about the best place for us to hide." She needed a plan. Going home was out of the question. If these men were following her, they probably already knew who she was and where she lived. The police wasn't an option either, considering Marco's reaction and what she now suspected about his family. Then she remembered her friend Elena Vasquez, who lived in an apartment in the Ironbound district, Newark's Portuguese and Brazilian area. Elena was a nurse at University Hospital and worked the night shift. More importantly, she lived in an apartment complex with multiple entrances and exits, which could offer some protection. Sarah grabbed her cell phone and dialed Elena's number, putting it on speaker. "Sarah, what a surprise! How are you?" Elena's warm voice filled the car. "Elena, I need a really big favor. Can I come to your apartment now? It's an emergency." Sarah's tone must have conveyed the urgency of the situation, because Elena responded immediately. "Of course, honey. You know where the spare key is. I'm at the hospital until tomorrow morning, so you have the place to yourself. Is everything okay? I'll explain later. Thank you, Elena. You're a lifesaver." Sarah hung up and headed toward the Ironbound. Behind her, the SUVs continued to follow, but she noticed one of them had separated from the group, probably trying to cut off her path. "Marco, I'm going to need you to stay down for a while longer, okay? We're going to a friend's house where we'll be safe." "Is she nice like you?" Marco asked, and Sarah could hear the hope in his voice. Yes, she's very nice, and she'll love meeting you. Sarah drove through the familiar streets of the Ironbound, passing Portuguese and Brazilian restaurants that were still open, their windows glowing with warm yellow light. The smell of home cooking managed to penetrate even the closed car, creating a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. She parked 2 blocks away from Elena's apartment on a dark side street. The SUVs had disappeared from sight, but Sarah knew that didn't mean they were safe. "Now we're going to walk a little," she said, getting out of the car and helping Marco out. "Stay close to me and try not to make noise." Marco took her hand without hesitation, his small, cold fingers intertwining with hers. They walked quickly along the wet sidewalks, Sarah constantly checking the surroundings for any sign of danger. Elena's apartment complex was a 4-story brick building, typical of 1960s architecture. Sarah found the spare key where Elena always left it, behind an artificial plant pot in the entrance hall. "Third floor," she whispered to Marco as they climbed the stairs. Their footsteps echoed softly in the empty corridor, and Sarah felt her heart beating so loud she was sure Marco could hear it. Elena's apartment was small but cozy, decorated with warm colors and family photographs. Sarah locked the door behind them and closed all the curtains before turning on the lights. "Wow," Marco said, looking around with admiration. "It's very beautiful here." "Elena has very good taste," Sarah agreed, finally allowing herself to relax a little. "You must be really hungry now. Let's see what she has in the fridge." Elena's kitchen was well stocked as always. Sarah found ingredients to make sandwiches and heated a can of chicken soup. While cooking, she watched Marco cautiously exploring the living room, his big eyes absorbing every detail. "Marco," she said while putting the food on the table, "I need to make some calls. Can you eat while I talk on the phone?" Marco nodded, climbing into a chair and attacking the food with the appetite of a child who hadn't eaten in hours. Sarah took her cell phone and went to Elena's bedroom, closing the door behind her. First, she called the school and left a message on the answering machine, explaining there was a family emergency and she couldn't work on Monday. Then she hesitated, looking at the phone in her hands. She needed help, but didn't know who to turn to. The police was out of the question, at least for now. Her family lived too far away to help, and she couldn't put other friends in danger. Returning to the kitchen, she found Marco finishing his sandwich, his eyelids heavy with fatigue. "Miss Sarah," he said sleepily, "when are we going to find my daddy?" Sarah sat beside him, choosing her words carefully. "Marco, I need you to tell me more about what happened today. Do you remember anything about the men who were shouting in your daddy's office?" Marco rubbed his eyes, fighting sleep. "They weren't from our family. Daddy got very angry when they arrived. He said words I can't repeat. Did you hear any names? Anything that might help us?" Marco thought for a moment. "They talked about money and about someone called Sal something." Sarah felt a chill. Salvatore was a common name in the Italian community, but in the context of the Rossi family, it could mean serious trouble. "Marco, do you know where your daddy might be now? Some special place where he goes when there are problems?" "He has a big house far from the city," Marco said, yawning, "with a lake and lots of trees. He takes me there sometimes on weekends." Before Sarah could ask more, the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor made them both freeze. The footsteps stopped in front of the apartment door, and Sarah heard the distinctive sound of someone testing the doorknob. She picked up Marco and ran to Elena's bedroom, silently closing the door behind them. Her heart was beating so hard, she was sure whoever was outside could hear it. "Miss Sarah," Marco whispered, clinging to her. "Did they find us?" Sarah put a finger to her lips, signaling him to be quiet. She could hear muffled voices outside the apartment door, at least 2 men talking in low tones. Then the sound she feared most, the front door being forced. Heavy footsteps entered the apartment, and Sarah heard furniture being moved, drawers being opened. They were systematically searching the apartment. Sarah looked around Elena's bedroom, desperately searching for an exit. The window faced a narrow alley, and they were on the 3rd floor. Too high to jump, but maybe. She remembered the fire escape she had seen outside the building. If she could get to the bathroom window, which was on the other side of the corridor. they could escape. "Marco," she whispered in his ear, "we're going to play hide and seek, okay? You need to be very, very quiet." Marco nodded, his big eyes reflecting the fear he felt, but also a touching trust in Sarah. The footsteps were approaching the bedroom. Sarah picked up Marco and hid behind the bed, praying the men wouldn't be thorough in their search. The bedroom door opened slowly and Sarah held her breath. A flashlight swept the room, its light passing dangerously close to where they were hiding. "Nothing here," a gruff voice said in English with an Italian accent. "Let's check the bathroom." Sarah waited until she heard the footsteps move away, then moved quickly. She carried Marco to the corridor, passing through the living room where she could see the silhouettes of two men in suits searching Elena's cabinets. The bathroom was at the end of the corridor, and Sarah managed to get there without being seen. The window was stuck, but she managed to open it after a few tense seconds. The fire escape was right there, wet from the rain but solid. "We're going down very slowly," she whispered to Marco as she helped him out the window. They descended the fire escape in silence, each step seeming to echo like a gunshot in the quiet night. When they reached the ground floor, Sarah could hear the men still searching the apartment above. "This way," she whispered, guiding Marco through the alley until they reached the side street where she had parked the car. But when they got there, the Honda Civic was no longer alone. One of the black SUVs was parked right behind it, and Sarah could see the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. They were trapped. Sarah looked around desperately, searching for an exit. Then she saw it. A subway station 2 blocks away. If they could get there without being seen, they could take a train anywhere in the city. "Marco," she whispered, "we're going to run now, okay? Hold my hand and don't look back." They ran through the wet streets, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold October air. Behind them, Sarah heard shouts and the sound of car doors slamming. The chase had resumed, but this time, Sarah was determined not to be caught. Marco needed her, and she wouldn't let him down. As they ran toward the subway station, she made a silent promise. She would protect this boy no matter the cost. The night was far from over, and Sarah knew the next few moments would determine whether they could escape or fall into the hands of the men who were relentlessly pursuing them through Newark's dark streets. Sarah and Marco ran down the stairs of Newark Penn Station subway station, their footsteps echoing on the damp concrete. The underground air smelled of a mixture of rain, diesel oil, and humanity, a characteristic aroma that Sarah had learned to associate with refuge in the months she'd been living in the city. The fluorescent lights flickered irregularly, creating dancing shadows on the faded tile walls. "Where are we going, Miss Sarah?" Marco asked, his small hand squeezing hers tightly as they blended into the sparse crowd of nighttime passengers. Sarah checked the schedule board, her mind working quickly. The train to New York would leave in 6 minutes, enough time to buy tickets and board, but she hesitated. New York would be too obvious, and she suspected the Rossi family's influence extended far beyond Newark. "We're taking the train to Trenton," she decided, heading to the automatic ticket machine. "From there, we can decide our next step." While buying the tickets, Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the stairs, expecting at any moment to see the suited men coming down after them. Marco was leaning against her leg, his big eyes nervously watching every person who passed. "Miss Sarah," he whispered, "that man over there is looking at us." Sarah followed Marco's gaze and saw a middle-aged man in a black leather coat standing near a column pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes were clearly focused on them. Her heart raced. They had been found again. "Let's go to the platform," she said calmly, picking up Marco, "and let's walk very slowly, as if we're not in a hurry." They walked toward the Trenton train platform, Sarah forcing herself to maintain a casual pace despite the panic she felt growing in her chest. Behind them, she could feel the man's eyes following them. The platform was moderately crowded for a Friday night, with workers heading home and some young people going to parties in other cities. Sarah chose a spot near a group of nurses who had clearly just finished their shift, hoping the presence of other people would offer some protection. 2 minutes until the train," announced an electronic voice over the speakers. Marco fidgeted restlessly in Sarah's arms. "Miss Sarah, I need to pee." Sarah looked around. The bathroom was on the other side of the platform, away from the crowd. But Marco was clearly uncomfortable, and she couldn't ignore his basic needs. "Okay, sweetheart, let's go quickly." They walked to the bathroom, Sarah constantly checking the surroundings. The man in the leather coat had disappeared, which made her even more nervous. Where was he now? Inside the men's bathroom, Sarah waited outside the stall, while Marco relieved himself. The place was empty except for them, and the silence was disturbing. "I'm done," Marco said, coming out of the stall. As they headed to the sink, the bathroom door opened and two men entered. Sarah immediately recognized one of them. It was the man in the leather coat. The other was younger, with dark hair and a small scar on his left cheek. "Miss Mitchell," the older man said in a surprisingly polite voice, "my name is Tony Benedetto. I need you to come with us." Sarah instinctively pulled Marco behind her. "We're not going anywhere with you." Tony smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. "You don't understand the situation. The boy belongs to the Rossi family. We're here to take him home." "I don't want to go with you," Marco shouted, clinging to Sarah's leg. "You're not from our family." The younger man stepped forward, but Tony stopped him with a hand gesture. "Marco, your father is very worried about you. He sent us to get you." "Liar," Marco responded with courage that surprised Sarah. "My daddy would never send you. He said if something happened, I should only trust blood family." Tony frowned, clearly not expecting resistance from a 7-year-old. "Listen, kid." "No," Sarah interrupted, finding her own courage. "If you really work for his father, then why is he so afraid of you? Why are you chasing us like criminals?" "Because the situation is complicated," Tony replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "There are dangerous people looking for the boy. We're trying to protect him." "Protect him from whom?" Sarah challenged. Before Tony could answer, the sound of the train arriving at the platform echoed through the bathroom. Sarah saw her chance. "Marco, run!" she shouted, pushing the boy toward the door. Chaos followed. Marco ran out of the bathroom with Sarah right behind. The two men pursued them, but the crowd on the platform delayed them. Sarah picked up Marco and ran toward the stopping train. "Wait!" Tony shouted behind them, but Sarah didn't look back. They managed to get on the train at the last second, the doors closing right behind them. Through the window, Sarah saw Tony and his partner running along the platform, but it was too late. The train began to move, taking them away from Newark and toward the unknown. Sarah found 2 empty seats and placed Marco by the window, away from the aisle. Their hearts were still racing from the adrenaline of the escape. "You were very brave," she said to Marco, smoothing his dark hair. "How did you know they weren't from your family?" Marco looked at her with eyes too serious for a child his age. "Daddy taught me to recognize people from our family. They have a special way of talking, of moving. Those men, they were different." Sarah nodded, impressed by the boy's perception. "Marco, I need you to tell me more about your family. Who are the people your father trusts? Where might they be now?" Marco thought for a moment, looking out the window at the lights passing quickly by. "There's Uncle Sal. He's not my real uncle, but Daddy calls him brother. And there's Nonna Rosa, Daddy's grandmother. She lives in a big house in Montclair." "Salvatore," Sarah murmured, remembering the name Marco had mentioned before. "Do you think your father might be with Uncle Sal?" "Maybe," Marco said uncertainly. "But Daddy always said if something bad happened, I should go to Nonna Rosa. She's the family matriarch." Sarah grabbed her cell phone, hesitating. She needed more information, but didn't know how to get it without exposing herself to danger. Then she had an idea. "Marco, do you know Nonna Rosa's last name? Or her address?" "Rosa Benedetto," Marco replied. "She lives in the house where my daddy grew up." Benedetto, the same last name as the man who had confronted them in the bathroom. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The connections were becoming clearer and more dangerous. She used her cell phone to discreetly search for information about the Benedetto family in Montclair. What she found made her even more worried. Rosa Benedetto, 78, was known in the community as a respected figure, but there were rumors that she was the real head of one of New Jersey's oldest crime families. "Marco," she said carefully, "the man who confronted us in the bathroom said his name was Tony Benedetto. Could he be related to your Nonna Rosa?" Marco's eyes widened. Uncle Tony? But he was traveling. Daddy said he wouldn't be back for weeks. Apparently he's back, Sarah said grimly. And that might mean the situation is even more serious than we thought. The train continued its journey through New Jersey's nighttime landscape, passing small towns and industrial areas. Sarah looked at Marco, who was beginning to doze against the window, and felt the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. She wasn't just a teacher who had found a lost child. She was now in the middle of a family war that could have deadly consequences. But looking at Marco's innocent face, she knew there was no turning back. Her cell phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Miss Mitchell, you don't know what you're getting into. Hand over the boy and no one will get hurt. TB." Sarah immediately deleted the message, but her hands were shaking. Tony Benedetto had gotten her number, which meant they knew much more about her than she would like. "Miss Sarah?" Marco had woken up and was looking at her with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she lied, forcing a smile. "I'm just thinking about what we're going to do when we get to Trenton. Can we call Nonna Rosa?" Marco suggested. She always knows what to do. Sarah considered the idea. Rosa Benedetto could be the key to solving the entire situation, or she could be even more dangerous than the men chasing them. But with few options left, maybe it was a risk she would have to take. "Do you have her phone number?" Sarah asked. Marco shook his head. "But I know where she lives. I can show the way." The train began to slow down, approaching Trenton Station. Sarah looked out the window at the approaching city, its lights shining in the darkness like terrestrial stars. "Okay," she decided. "Let's find your Nonna Rosa. But first we need to make sure it's safe." As the train stopped at the station, Sarah said a silent prayer. She was about to go even deeper into the dangerous world of the Rossi family, but she saw no other choice. Marco needed her, and she had promised to protect him. What she didn't know was that her decision to seek out Rosa Benedetto would set in motion a series of events that would change not only their lives, but the balance of power throughout the region. The family matriarch was waiting for them, and she had her own plans for the lost grandson and the brave teacher who had saved him. The night was far from over, and the real challenges were yet to come. The taxi traveled through Montclair's tree-lined streets at 2 a.m, its wheels whispering over the wet asphalt. Sarah watched the elegant houses passing by the window, Victorian and colonial mansions that spoke of old wealth and established power. Marco was awake beside her, his eyes shining with recognition as they approached the neighborhood where he had spent many Sundays of his childhood. "It's there," Marco said, pointing to an imposing red brick mansion at the end of a dead-end street. The property was surrounded by a high stone wall, and wrought iron gates guarded the entrance. Even in the darkness, Sarah could see that the gardens were meticulously maintained, with elaborate topiaries and ornamental fountains. "Are you sure your grandmother will receive us at this hour?" Sarah asked, paying the taxi driver. "Nonna Rosa never sleeps much," Marco replied with a child's confidence. "She always says sleep is for the weak." They walked to the gates, where Sarah noticed discreet security cameras mounted on the stone pillars. Before she could look for a doorbell, the gates began to open silently as if someone was watching them. "She already knows we're here," Marco said simply, taking Sarah's hand. They walked along the circular cobblestone driveway, passing gardens that looked like they came from a magazine. The mansion rose before them like a castle, with its arched windows and ornate balconies. Soft lights illuminated the facade, creating dramatic shadows that gave the place an air of mystery and power. The front door opened before they reached the steps. An elderly woman appeared in the doorway, and Sarah immediately understood where Marco had inherited his expressive eyes. Rosa Benedetto was 78 years old, but her posture was erect and commanding. Her silver hair was perfectly arranged even at that hour, and she wore an embroidered silk robe that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. "Marco, mio caro bambino," she said, in a voice that carried decades of authority, opening her arms. Marco ran to her, and Sarah watched the transformation in his face as he nestled in his grandmother's arms. For a moment, he was just a scared child finding comfort again. "Nonna, terrible things happened." Marco said in Italian, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Rosa held him for a moment before looking at Sarah over the boy's head. Her eyes were penetrating, evaluating every detail of Sarah's appearance with the precision of someone accustomed to judging people quickly. "And you must be the brave teacher who saved my grandson," Rosa said in English with a slight Italian accent. "Sarah Mitchell, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, surprised that Rosa already knew her name. "Mrs. Benedetto, Come in," Rosa interrupted, gesturing for them to enter. "The night is cold, and we have much to discuss." The mansion's interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall had a vaulted ceiling with a crystal chandelier that projected rainbows on the marble walls. Oil paintings in golden frames adorned the walls, and Sarah recognized at least two that appeared to be originals by Italian masters. Rosa led them through corridors lined with Persian rugs to a cozy library. The walls were covered with books from floor to ceiling, and a fireplace crackled softly, filling the environment with the aroma of burning wood and old leather. "Sit down," Rosa said, indicating two leather armchairs near the fireplace. "Marco, you must be hungry. I'll ask Carmela to prepare something." "Is Carmela still here?" Marco asked, excited. "She would never leave me," Rosa smiled, touching her grandson's face tenderly. "Go to the kitchen. She'll be happy to see you." After Marco left, Rosa served herself a glass of red wine from a bottle on a side table and offered one to Sarah, who politely declined. "So," Rosa said, sitting in an armchair opposite Sarah's, "tell me exactly what happened today." Sarah recounted the night's events, from finding Marco in the rain, to the chase by the suited men and the confrontation at the subway station. Rosa listened in silence, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face, occasionally asking specific questions about details. "Tony Benedetto," Rosa murmured when Sarah mentioned the name. "My nephew was always impulsive. So he really is family?" Sarah asked. "Yes, but he wasn't acting under my orders," Rosa replied, her voice carrying a coldness that made Sarah shiver. "Tony has his own ambitions, and they don't always align with the family's interests." Sarah leaned forward. "Mrs. Benedetto, I need to understand what's happening. Where is Marco's father? Why are these men after him?" Rosa took a sip of wine, carefully considering her words. "Vincent is indisposed at the moment. There was a disagreement with some of our business associates. Nothing that can't be resolved, but until it is, Marco needs to be safe." "Disagreement about what?" "Territory, money, the usual things that cause problems in our line of work," Rosa said, with a naturalness that made Sarah uncomfortable. "But you don't need to worry about those details." "I worry because I'm involved now," Sarah replied with more firmness than she felt. "These men chased me. They know who I am, where I work. My life has completely changed in a matter of hours." Rosa studied Sarah for a long moment. "You're right, of course. By saving Marco, you became part of our story, and I don't forget debts." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Marco returned to the library carrying a plate of cookies and a glass of milk. Behind him came a robust Italian woman in her 60s, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and an apron over her dark dress. "Carmela, this is Miss Sarah," Marco said, introducing them. "She saved me." Carmela looked at Sarah with warm eyes and said something in Italian too fast for Sarah to understand, but the tone was clearly one of gratitude. "She said you're an angel sent by God," Rosa translated, "and she wants to know if you'd like something to eat." "Thank you, but I'm fine," Sarah replied, touched by the woman's kindness. Rosa dismissed Carmela with a wave, and they were alone again with Marco, who was eating his cookies near the fireplace. "Nonna," Marco said suddenly, "where is Daddy? When will he come back?" Rosa got up and went to the window, looking at the dark gardens. "Your father is taking care of important business, dear, but he'll be back soon." Sarah noticed that Rosa didn't look at Marco when she said this, and a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. "Mrs. Benedetto," she said carefully, "is Vincent really okay?" Rosa turned, and for a moment Sarah saw a vulnerability in her eyes that the matriarch quickly hid. "Vincent is a strong man. He has survived many storms." "That doesn't answer my question." No, Rosa agreed. It doesn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Marco, oblivious to the tension, had fallen asleep in the armchair, his empty plate in his lap. "He's dead, isn't he?" Sarah whispered. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was iron determination in them. "Vincent was attacked this afternoon. He's in the hospital in a coma. The doctors are not optimistic." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. My God, Marco doesn't know. No, and he can't know. Not yet. Rosa returned to her armchair, suddenly looking all of her 78 years. If Vincent dies, Marco will become the heir to everything. That will put him in even greater danger. Heir to what, exactly? To an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Rosa said simply. Restaurants, construction companies, real estate investments, and yes, also the less conventional businesses. Sarah looked at Marco sleeping, so small and innocent, and felt the weight of the responsibility she had unknowingly assumed. Why do Tony and his men want Marco? Because if Vincent dies, and something happens to Marco, Tony would be next in the line of succession, Rosa explained. He always believed he should lead the family instead of Vincent. So he wants to hurt Marco? Not necessarily, but he wants to control him, raise him his way, make him the kind of leader Tony can manipulate. Rosa leaned forward. I can't allow that. Sarah processed the information, trying to fully understand the situation. What do you want from me? Your help, Rosa said directly. Marco trusts you. He feels safe with you. I need you to continue taking care of him while I resolve the situation with Tony. For how long? A few weeks. Maybe a month. Sarah shook her head. I can't. I have my job, my life. I don't know anything about taking care of a child in a situation like this. I will compensate you generously, Rosa said, and I'll provide protection. You and Marco will stay at one of my safe properties until everything is resolved. And if I refuse, Rosa looked at her with an expression that was both sad and implacable. Then you'll be on your own against Tony and his men, and they're not known for their mercy with witnesses. Sarah felt a chill. She was being manipulated, but she also recognized the truth in Rosa's words. She was already too involved to simply walk away. If I agree, she said slowly, I want some guarantees. Which ones? First, I want to know the truth about everything. No more half-truths or omissions. Second, if Vincent recovers, I want Marco returned to him immediately. And third, when this is all over, I want to be free to return to my normal life. Rosa considered the conditions. I agree to the first and third. As for the second, if Vincent recovers, he will decide what's best for Marco. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best deal Sarah could get. She looked at Marco, still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his life had changed forever. Okay, she said finally. I'll help. Rosa smiled for the first time since they met. You're stronger than you look, Sarah Mitchell. Marco chose well when he decided to trust you. While Rosa made arrangements for them to be taken to a safe house, Sarah wondered if she had made the right decision. But looking at Marco, she knew she couldn't abandon him now. He had lost his mother, his father was dying, and she was the only constant in his crumbling world. The night was coming to an end, but Sarah knew her journey was just beginning. She had entered the world of the Rossi family as a stranger, but now she was part of a war that would determine the future of an innocent boy and the fate of a criminal empire. And deep in her heart, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy night that changed everything. Sarah woke to the familiar sound of Marco playing in the garden of the safe house in Bernardsville, an isolated property in the New Jersey mountains that Rosa had provided for them. The house was a modern 2-story construction, surrounded by acres of dense forest that offered privacy and security. She got up from bed and went to the window, watching Marco run after a golden retriever named Bruno that Rosa had brought to keep the boy company. For a moment, seeing him laugh and play under the golden November morning sun, it was easy to forget the circumstances that brought them there. But reality always returned. The 2 security men who discreetly patrolled the property, the sophisticated alarm system, the bulletproof windows, All of this served as constant reminders that they weren't there on vacation. "Miss Sarah!" Marco shouted from the garden, waving at her. "Come play with us!" Sarah smiled and waved back. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Let me have coffee first." In the kitchen, she found a cup of fresh coffee waiting for her. Courtesy of Maria, the housekeeper Rosa had assigned to take care of them. Maria was a quiet woman in her 50s who spoke little English, but cooked like an angel and treated Marco as if he were her own grandson. "Good morning, Maria," Sarah said, taking the cup. "Good morning, señorita," Maria replied with her heavy Spanish accent. "Señora Rosa called. She's coming this afternoon." Sarah nodded. Rosa visited regularly, always bringing news about Vincent's situation and Tony's movements. The news was never good. Vincent remained in a coma, and Tony was consolidating his power, gradually taking control of the family businesses. The phone rang, and Sarah answered, immediately recognizing Rosa's voice. "Sarah, dear, how is Marco today?" "He's fine, playing in the garden with Bruno." "But Rosa," Sarah hesitated. "He's been asking about his father more frequently. It's getting hard to make excuses." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I know. That's why I'm coming there today. We need to talk." "Did something happen?" "Vincent, there were complications. The doctor said if he doesn't wake up in the next 48 hours... Rosa didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. "Oh, Rosa, I'm so sorry." "It's not over yet," Rosa said with determination. "But we need to prepare for all possibilities. See you at 3. Sarah hung up the phone with a heavy heart. In the last 3 weeks, she had developed genuine affection for Marco. He was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly resilient. But she also saw how his father's absence affected him. He sometimes woke up crying, calling for Vincent, and Sarah had to comfort him with promises she didn't know if she could keep. She went out to the garden where Marco was teaching Bruno to fetch a tennis ball. "Look, Miss Sarah, Bruno already learned to bring the ball back." "He's very smart," Sarah said, sitting on the grass beside him. "Marco, can I talk to you about something?" Marco stopped playing and sat beside her, his expression becoming serious. In the last few weeks, he had developed an acute sensitivity to changes in the adults' moods around him. "It's about Daddy, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Sarah felt her heart tighten. "Why do you think that?" "Because every time Nonna comes here, you whisper, and because it's been a long time since he called." Marco looked at her with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Is he dead?" The direct question caught Sarah by surprise. She had rehearsed various ways to approach the subject, but never expected Marco to be so direct. "No, sweetheart, he's not dead, but he's very sick." "In the hospital?" "Yes." Marco processed this information in silence, pulling pieces of grass with his small fingers. "Will he get better?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "The doctors are doing everything they can, but sometimes when people get very sick, they need a lot of time to get better." "Like Mommy got sick?" The question hit Sarah like a punch. Marco rarely talked about his mother, and when he did, it was always with a deep sadness that broke her heart. "Not exactly like your mommy," Sarah said gently. "Your daddy was hurt, not sick like her." "Hurt how?" Sarah hesitated. How to explain to a 7-year-old that his father had been shot in a gang war? "He was in an accident. A very serious accident." Marco nodded, seeming to accept the explanation. But then he asked, "Is that why we're hiding here? Because whoever hurt Daddy might want to hurt us too?" Marco's perception continued to surprise Sarah. "Yes, partly. But we're also here because your Nonna wants to make sure you're safe while your daddy recovers." "And you? Why are you here with me instead of being at school teaching other children?" It was a question Sarah had asked herself many times in the last few weeks. "Because I care about you, Marco, and because I want to make sure you're okay." Marco leaned against her, and Sarah hugged him, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had assumed. He wasn't just a child she was protecting. He had become part of her life in a way she had never anticipated. "Miss Sarah?" "Yes?" "If Daddy doesn't get better, what will happen to me?" The question Sarah feared most. "Your Nonna will take care of you, and I'll be here for as long as you need me. Promise?" Sarah looked into Marco's trusting eyes, and felt the weight of a promise she didn't know if she could keep. "I promise I'll do everything I can to take care of you." At 3 in the afternoon, Rosa arrived in a black Mercedes, accompanied by 2 bodyguards who remained in the car. She seemed to have aged years in the last few weeks, her aristocratic features marked by tension and worry. "How did he react?" Rosa asked after Sarah recounted the morning's conversation. "Better than I expected. He's stronger than he looks." "He needs to be," Rosa said grimly. "Sarah, I need to tell you some things. Vincent, the doctor said that even if he wakes up, there might be permanent brain damage. He might never be the same again." Sarah felt her stomach sink. "And Tony? He's moving quickly to consolidate control. He's convinced some of the captains that Vincent is permanently incapacitated and that he should assume leadership. And Marco? Tony hasn't made any direct move against him yet, but my informants say he's planning something. He knows that as long as Marco is alive and under my protection, his claim to power isn't legitimate." Sarah got up and began pacing the room. "Rosa, you're talking about a child's life. Marco isn't a piece in a chess game. Do you think I don't know that?" Rosa responded with a passion that surprised Sarah. "Do you think it's easy for me to see my grandson in this situation? But this is the reality of the world we were born into. Marco is Vincent's legitimate heir. That comes with power, but also with danger." "Then take him out of this world," Sarah said. "Change his name, change his identity. Let him have a normal life." Rosa shook her head. "It's not that simple. There's too much money involved, too many people whose livelihood depends on the family businesses. And Tony would never stop looking for him. So what are you suggesting?" Rosa got up and went to the window, watching Marco play in the garden. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for Marco to learn about his inheritance, about who he really is. He's 7 years old. I was 6 when I learned about the family business," Rosa said calmly. "It's better that he learns from us who love him than from Tony, who sees him only as a means to an end." Sarah felt anger growing inside her. "You want to turn an innocent child into a criminal?" Rosa turned, her eyes shining with fierce intensity. "I want my grandson to survive, and in our world, innocence is a luxury that can cost lives." Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of cars approaching quickly. Rosa immediately became alert, grabbing her cell phone. "I'm not expecting anyone," she said, dialing a number. "Giuseppe, did you see the cars?" Sarah could hear the bodyguard's tense voice through the phone, but couldn't understand the words. "Shit," Rosa murmured. "Sarah, get Marco and go to the basement now." "What's happening?" "Tony found you." The sound of tires screeching on the gravel driveway confirmed Rosa's worst fears. Sarah ran to the garden where Marco was still playing with Bruno, oblivious to the approaching danger. "Marco, we need to go inside now," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Why? I'm still playing." "It's a game," Sarah said quickly. "Let's play hide and seek in the basement." Marco, accustomed to the strange games that had become part of his life, obeyed without question. They ran into the house where Rosa waited for them with a pistol in her hand. "The basement has a secret exit that leads to the forest," she said quickly. "Maria will show you the way. There's a car hidden a kilometer from here." "And you?" Sarah asked. "I'm going to try to delay them." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Sarah picked up Marco and followed Maria toward the basement, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "Miss Sarah," Marco whispered, "this isn't a game, is it?" Sarah looked into the boy's scared but brave eyes and made a decision that would change their lives forever. "No, sweetheart, it's not a game. But I promise I'll protect you, no matter what happens." As they descended into the dark basement, Sarah could hear loud voices coming from the house entrance. Tony had arrived, and the war for Marco Rossi's soul was about to begin. But this time, Sarah was determined to fight. Marco wasn't just a child she was protecting. He had become the son she never had, and she would do anything to keep him safe. The teacher who had found a lost child in the rain had transformed into something she never imagined being, a warrior willing to face the underworld to protect the boy she loved. And as they fled through the secret passage towards the dark forest, Sarah knew her old life had ended forever. But looking at Marco, who trusted her completely even amid danger, she realized that perhaps her new life, however dangerous it might be, was worth any sacrifice. The rain had stopped long ago, but the storm in their lives was just beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the white linen curtains of the small cottage Sarah had rented in Cannon Beach, Oregon. The rhythmic sound of Pacific waves had become the soundtrack of their lives, replacing Newark's urban noise with something infinitely more peaceful. Sarah woke naturally, without needing an alarm clock, a luxury she had learned to appreciate after months of living in constant alert. She got up silently and walked to the next room, where Marco slept deeply in a bed, decorated with pirate-themed sheets. At 8 years old now, he had grown visibly in recent months. His dark hair was longer, and his skin had gained a healthy tan from afternoons on the beach. More importantly, the shadows of fear that used to inhabit his eyes had given way to something Sarah hadn't seen in a long time: the genuine, carefree nature of childhood. In the kitchen, she prepared coffee and pancakes, a Saturday tradition they had established. While cooking, her eyes drifted to the newspaper folded on the table. Even here, 3,000 miles away, she couldn't resist checking New Jersey news. The front page headline made her stop. "Gang war in Newark leaves 5 dead." Sarah opened the newspaper with trembling hands. The photos showed a familiar scene: police cars, yellow tape, and in the background, the Bella Vista restaurant she knew belonged to the Rossi family. The article spoke of escalating violence between rival factions, with Tony Benedetto consolidating his power through increasingly brutal methods. "Good morning, Miss Sarah," came Marco's sleepy voice behind her. Sarah quickly closed the newspaper and turned with a forced smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Marco nodded, rubbing his eyes. He wore pajamas with whale designs, one of many small normalcies Sarah had worked to bring into his life. "I dreamed we were pirates sailing the ocean." "What a fun dream," Sarah said, serving the pancakes. "Maybe we can play pirates on the beach today." While Marco ate, Sarah observed his movements. In the first months after leaving New Jersey, he frequently woke with nightmares, screaming for his father or grandmother. But gradually, with patience and lots of love, these episodes had become rare. Now he was a normal 8-year-old, worried about things like building sand castles and learning to surf. "Miss Sarah," Marco said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you miss being a teacher?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. She had told Marco she was on vacation from teaching, but the truth was more complicated. With her new identity, Sarah Collins instead of Sarah Mitchell, she couldn't simply return to her previous career. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but you know what? Teaching you has been the best part of being a teacher." It was true. In recent months, she had become Marco's private tutor, teaching him not just academic subjects, but also about life, values, and how to navigate the world without resorting to violence or intimidation. It was a constant challenge, especially considering what he had witnessed in his early years. "Do you think someday I can go to a real school?" Marco asked. Sarah hesitated. It was a question she constantly asked herself. Marco needed socialization with other children, but his safety was still a constant concern. "Maybe," she said carefully, "when we're sure it's safe." After breakfast, they walked to the beach. Cannon Beach was a small coastal town with fewer than 2,000 inhabitants, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and strangers were immediately noticed. Sarah had chosen the location precisely for this reason. It would be difficult for someone to approach without being detected. On the beach, Marco immediately ran to the spot where he had started building an elaborate sandcastle the previous week. Sarah sat on a nearby rock, watching him work with the intense concentration she had learned to associate with his personality. "Look, Miss Sarah!" Marco shouted, pointing to an impressive structure he had created. "It's a castle with watchtowers, like the ones Nonna used to show me in books." Sarah smiled but felt a pang of sadness. Rosa Benedetto had died 3 months after their escape from New Jersey. Officially, it had been a car accident. She had lost control on a dangerous curve during a storm. But Sarah knew the truth. Tony had eliminated the only person who still represented a threat to his control of the family. News of Rosa's death had arrived through an envelope without a return address, containing only a newspaper clipping and a handwritten letter. Sarah, Rosa died as she lived, protecting the family. She left specific instructions about Marco. There's a bank account in your name, details attached, that will ensure you never want for anything. Use it wisely. Take care. A friend. The account contained more money than Sarah had ever seen, enough to support her and Marco comfortably for the rest of their lives. But the money came with the weight of responsibility and the constant reminder that they were living on resources obtained through questionable means. "Miss Sarah," Marco said, interrupting her thoughts. "Are you sad again?" Sarah was surprised by his perception. "Why do you think I'm sad?" "You get that expression when you're thinking about Nonna or Daddy," Marco said, sitting beside her on the sand. "I get sad sometimes too." Sarah hugged him, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had assumed. "It's normal to be sad when we miss people we love. But you know what makes me happy?" "What?" "Being here with you. Seeing you grow and become an incredible person." Marco smiled, but then his expression became serious. "Miss Sarah, do you think I'm a bad person because of my family?" The question hit Sarah like lightning. She turned to look directly into Marco's eyes. "Marco, listen to me carefully. You're not responsible for the choices others made. You're a good, kind, and intelligent person. What your family did doesn't define who you are. But what if I have, what's it called? Bad genes?" Sarah almost smiled at how he pronounced genes, but the seriousness of the question stopped her. "Genes don't determine if we're good or bad, sweetheart. Our choices determine that, and you've been making good choices every day." They spent the rest of the morning on the beach, Marco returning to his sand castle, while Sarah read a book. But her mind kept wandering to the future. What would happen when Marco got older? How would she explain why they couldn't go home? How would she prepare him for a world where his last name carried so much weight and danger? In the afternoon, they returned to the cottage, where Sarah found a surprise waiting for them. On the front porch, there was a cardboard box addressed to Sarah Collins. There was no return address, but Sarah immediately recognized the elegant handwriting on the address. "What is this?" Marco asked, curious. "I don't know." Sarah lied, her heart racing. "Let's see. Inside the box, there were several things. Old photographs of Marco with his parents, some of his favorite toys that had been left behind, and a sealed letter with Marco written on the front. "These are my things," Marco exclaimed, picking up a toy car Sarah remembered seeing him play with that first night. "How did they get here?" Sarah examined the letter, recognizing Rosa's handwriting. "Your grandmother must have asked someone to send them to you." Marco held the letter with reverence. "Is it from Nonna?" "Yes. Do you want me to read it to you?" Marco nodded and Sarah carefully opened the envelope. The letter was written in Italian and English, Rosa's elegant handwriting filling 2 pages. "Mio caro Marco, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer with you. Don't be sad for me, bambino. I lived a long and full life, and my greatest joy was watching you grow in your early years. I want you to know some important things. First, your daddy loved you more than anything in the world. He made difficult choices to protect you and our family, and even though some of those choices weren't perfect, they always came from a place of love. Second, you have a choice to make when you grow up. You can choose to follow the family path with all the power and responsibility that brings. Or you can choose a different path, using your intelligence and kindness to do good in the world in other ways. Both choices are valid, and I will love you regardless of what you decide. Third, Miss Sarah is a gift from God in your life. She sacrificed everything to protect you, and you must honor that sacrifice by being the best man you can be. Finally, always remember that you are a Rossi. That means you have strength, intelligence, and the ability to lead. Use these gifts wisely. With all my love, Nonna Rosa P.S. There's one more thing in the box for Miss Sarah. Sarah searched the box and found a smaller envelope with her name. Inside, there was a key and an address in Portland, Oregon, along with a brief note. Sarah, this is the key to a house I bought for you. It's yours now, free and clear. Marco will need stability to grow, and you deserve a real home. Thank you for loving my grandson as if he were your own. R.B. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Even in death, Rosa continued to care for them. Miss Sarah, why are you crying? Marco asked, worried. These are happy tears, sweetheart. Your grandmother gave us a very special gift. That night, after Marco went to sleep, Sarah sat on the cottage porch, watching the stars over the ocean. She thought about the journey that had brought them there. From the elementary school teacher she was to the guardian of a child whose future was full of possibilities and dangers. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Sarah hesitated before answering. Hello? Miss Mitchell. The voice was male with a slight Italian accent. Or should I say, Miss Collins? Sarah's blood froze. Who is this? Someone who has been looking for you and the boy for a long time. But don't worry, I'm not Tony Benedetto. Then who are you? My name is Michael Torino. am a friend of the Rossi family. Rosa asked me to take care of you if something happened to her. Sarah gripped the phone. How do I know I can trust you? Because if I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already. I've known where you are for weeks. The thought was terrifying, but there was something in the man's voice that made her hesitate before hanging up. What do you want? I want you to know you're not alone. Tony is consolidating his power, but he's not the only player on the board. There are people who are still loyal to Vincent and Rosa's memory, people who want to protect Marco. And what does that mean for us? It means you can stop running. It means Marco can have a normal life, go to school, make friends. But it also means that when he turns 18, he'll have to make a decision about his future. Sarah closed her eyes. And if he chooses not to get involved with the family, then that choice will be respected. Rosa left very clear instructions about that. And if he chooses to get involved, then he'll have the support of people who will help him rebuild the family the right way, without unnecessary violence, without the brutality Tony brought. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, processing the information. Miss Collins, Michael continued, you did something extraordinary. You saved not just Marco's life, but his soul. Regardless of what the future brings, that will never be forgotten. I just did what any decent person would do. No, Michael said firmly. You did what a mother would do, and that's what you became to him, isn't it? Sarah felt tears in her eyes again. Yes, she whispered. That's what I became. Then continue being his mother. Let him be a child for as long as you can. And when the time comes for him to make difficult decisions, be by his side. After the call ended, Sarah sat on the porch for hours, watching the waves crash on the beach. She thought about the life she had left behind, the security of her teaching career, the predictability of her routine, the simplicity of her concerns. But then she thought about Marco, sleeping peacefully in the next room, trusting her completely to protect and guide him. She thought about his laughter on the beach, the way his eyes lit up when he learned something new, the way he called her Miss Sarah with such affection. She had lost her old life, but had gained something much more precious, a purpose, a family, and a love deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The next day, they drove to Portland to see the house Rosa had left for them. It was a charming Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood, with a large garden and a distant view of the mountains. Marco ran through the empty rooms, his voice echoing as he explored his new home. Miss Sarah, he shouted from upstairs. There's a room that's perfect for you, and another that can be mine. Sarah smiled, imagining how it would be to decorate the house, create a real home for them. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think about the future, not in terms of survival, but in terms of possibilities. That night, as they ate pizza on the floor of the empty living room, Marco asked a question that surprised her. Miss Sarah, do you think someday I can call you Mom? Sarah felt her heart stop for a moment. Would you like that? Yes, Marco said simply. Because that's what you are to me. You take care of me, protect me, teach me things. Isn't that what mothers do? Sarah knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. Marco, I would be honored if you called me Mom. Because you became my son in every way that matters." Marco smiled, the brightest smile she had seen from him since they met. "So can I call you Mom from now on?" "You can," Sarah said, hugging him tight. "Yes, my son." As they embraced in the middle of the empty house that would become their home, Sarah knew she had made the right decision that rainy night in Newark. She had saved Marco, but in the process, he had also saved her. They were a family now, not traditional, not without complications, but real and full of love, and regardless of the challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The teacher who had found a lost child in the rain had found her own way home, and the boy who had lost everything had gained something new, a mother who would love him unconditionally, protect him fiercely, and help him become the man he chose to be. The storm had passed. The sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time, the future seemed full of hope.